Welcome to the Buck Stops here, the official audio program of NotInHallOfFame.com, and I'm your host, Kirk Buckner, the Buck, the owner and the operator of NotInHallOfFame.com and the sister sites, the Fictitious Athlete Hall of Fame and the Fictitious Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We're taking the Starship fame out to Charlotte, North Carolina, and we're talking with Fonda Bryant today. I had the chance to speak with Fonda about a year and a half ago. We connected over Twitter, and she's the daughter of soul legend Johnny Taylor. And in our first conversation, we discussed the merits of Johnny Taylor being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and his career overall. Today we have really a different conversation. We're talking about sports and race in the American culture. Now, as all of you know, I'm a Canadian living in Barbados, so why do I care so much about issues in the United States? Well, I always have. And sports in America has always been something near and dear to me, so it was sort of a natural conversation to have, but one that was awkward. And Fonda reminded me in a previous conversation that her and I had, it's okay to have these awkward conversations, because that's the only way we're going to learn. Without further ado, I'm going to bring in someone who I would like to consider a friend of mine now, Miss Fonda Bryant. So I've got with me today someone I don't usually use the term blessed because I'm not really a religious person, but I feel blessed that I made this lady's acquaintance about a year and a half ago on a show, and I'm so happy to again be talking to Fonda Bryant, but this time about a much different topic. Welcome aboard.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to do this and to have a meaningful conversation. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we had a pre-conversation a couple weeks ago, and one thing you said to me has really sort of stuck in, because I think when I first reached out to you, you could tell I was massively uncomfortable with the idea of talking about sort of the race relations in a country, A, I'm not from, and B, I don't live in. And C, as a white guy who hasn't really experienced virtually anything other than my Asian in-laws not liking me too much, but it's really stuff I kind of laugh at, to be honest. It's not the same. And you said to me, point blank, well, you know what? It's okay to have uncomfortable conversations because that's the only way we're going to progress.
Definitely, and I mean that, that goes for racism, that goes for mental health, that goes for suicide. You have to have those uncomfortable conversations to become comfortable for change through action. So you have to do that, because if we don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations, how are we going to produce change? And I truly believe that, because I deal with it every day, dealing with mental health and suicide, but I'm also an African-American woman. I have a son, brothers, cousins who are African-American, and so I see what's going on in this country, and I know that we need to have these conversations if we're going to produce change.
Yeah, and before we sort of go on further, if you could tell everyone, because the last time we spoke, we were mostly talking about your dad, but we weren't talking a lot about yourself, so... and I think a lot has sort of changed, too, since our first conversation, and how much now you're working with the athletic community.
Yes, I'll let everybody know that I just celebrated my 25-year being a suicide survivor back on February 14th before the pandemic. But I am very aware of what's going on in this country with mental health, because right now, and really in the world, because I really believe that everybody has post-traumatic stress. No one saw this coming when they came out with the first person in China that had it and died from it. I guess people thought, well, yeah, we're going to have some cases and we're going to lose some people, but no one knew that the coronavirus is going to shut down the country and change how we interact with each other every day. So one of the things that I have been doing since my son was a college football player is that I am recognizing more and more that student athletes deal with a lot. My son played football and graduated from Wake Forest University, and I had no idea that while he was playing, he was dealing with anxiety until he came to me years later and told me, hey, Mom, I was dealing with anxiety the whole time I was playing football, and I didn't know. And so he goes to therapy, and I'm very proud of him because he's an offensive lineman. He's about 6'4", 300 and something pounds. And, you know, when you look at these guys, you expect them to be strong and, you know, mentally and physically, because one of the two words I can't stand together are when I hear coaches saying being mentally tough. You got to be mentally tough. And to me, when you say that, that's telling a student athlete that if they're dealing with depression, anxiety, bipolar, or struggling mentally, that they're supposed to suck it up and ignore it, and you can't do that. So for me, I have been very vocal as well as hands-on with student athletes across the country, helping them to navigate through mental health and, you know, suicide prevention. And I've also started doing more with college athletic trainers who have really taught me a lot through training them with buffering to be between the coaches and the players to help them with their mental health. And also I had the opportunity with my QPR suicide prevention training to train 8 Division I coaches and 2 high school coaches. And but that's not enough. You know, we got way more than 8 Division I colleges. So, and colleges period, you know, universities that have football. So one of the things that I really want to do is to continue to help student athletes navigate through college and help them with their mental health, because just because they look strong and athletic, it doesn't mean that they're not suffering in silence. So that's one of the things I've really been doing, and I've been proud to train student athletes. And I've had universities reach out to me and say, hey, our student athletes want to take this training, which is really a great thing. That means that we're on the right path, but it's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, and we're not. And when you mentioned again Division I, so we're talking like some very big schools that you were telling me before, with Florida State and BYU.
Yes, you know, and not just, you know, BYU. I've been in Florida State, but I've been helping students at Wake Forest and other schools, and I train trainers, athletic trainers from the University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, Ohio State, Clemson, UCF, South Carolina. I mean, the list goes on, and I just trained in a whole Division II conference, the Sunshine State Conference. Had never heard of them before. And I trained athletic trainers, student athletes, directors of sports medicine from all over. So again, they're seeing this need that we got to do better with mental health, because if you don't have mentally healthy youth, you're not going to have mentally healthy adults. And that was one of the reasons why I pushed the ACC to get the Mental Health Summit on board. And Commissioner Swafford is getting ready to step down, I think, after this year. And I'm just really glad that before he stepped down, I was able to push them to start looking at student athletes' mental health. So we had the first ACC Mental Health Summit and Wellness Summit back in 2019. We were supposed to have it this year, but because of the virus, we didn't. Mm-hmm. But I'm hoping that as each year moves forward, it'll get better and better. And I think all conferences need to have a mental health summit and bring in all of the coaches and the student athletes and be open and honest about what's going on with mental health in this country.
Yeah, and that's certainly trending in the right direction. I don't know if I ever mentioned in Canada, there's a big push from one of the national phone companies, Bell, which they have a Let's Talk Day. So that's sort of been, I'd like to think Canada, maybe we're a little bit ahead of the curve on that, or maybe I guess we're all behind the curve. I mean, I guess ahead of the curve compared to how other countries are dealing with it, I suppose. But it's all steps in the right direction, which originally we were supposed to do this a couple of weeks ago. But since that time, actually, I'm kind of glad it got pushed back, because so many more things have changed in terms of race relations. I'd like to think for the better. And sometimes when you look at, I almost have to get off Twitter sometimes, because sometimes I get disgusted by the toxicity of mentions, regardless of whether you're pro-left, pro-right, whatever it is that you believe on. The pound back can be really hurtful for that. And I think nowhere have I seen more of that is with everything regarding Bubba Wallace, a sport in NASCAR that I'm not really a big fan of. Just I'm not a car racing guy. Having said that, when Bubba Wallace came out and said, all right, about how his feelings about the Confederate flag, and then 2 days later, and to NASCAR's credit, they did something I never thought they were going to do, and ban that particular flag. And we saw some interesting reactions. I think there was one racer in a modified series who would never won a race saying, "Okay, well, I'm leaving." It's an offense to my heritage, whatever he meant by that. But for the most part, I thought it was the best decision that they could make. And you, as an African American woman living in the South, in Charlotte, you live in Charlotte, right?
Yes, the Charlotte Concord area, where actually I'm more towards Concord.
Okay.
I could drive to the Speedway from where I live in like less than 10 minutes.
Okay, but living in NASCAR country, so it's something that you're certainly very familiar with. What was your initial reaction to NASCAR for doing that?
Well, I have to go back a little bit and give you a little bit of history of my family with NASCAR.
Sure.
Growing up, I never cared for NASCAR. My Aunt T and her boyfriend used to go to racing all the time. They would go to NASCAR in the 50s, even before I was born, and I was born in 1960. So they would go to the NASCAR races, and I never understood that because when my family used to talk about NASCAR, they would always say how racist it was. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, why is Aunt T, going to the race? But her and her boyfriend loved it, so they went, so I didn't say anything. My mother worked for Wick's Filters that actually produced the filters for Richard Petty's car. I think it was STP or whatever it was, but they actually made the oil filters. So every year when Wick's Filters would have their picnic, they would always bring Richard Petty's car, but Richard Petty was nowhere to be found. So again, you got the race car was neat, but you still weren't going to say, I'm going to jump on NASCAR. So as years evolved, one of my son's teammates, Rocco Williams, he actually became a pit crew member for NASCAR. He is African American and Asian descent. And his first stint was with Ganassi Racing. And he told me how rough it was to work for them because he was the only African American there. And he said it was very hard to deal with working there. And he ended up leaving Ganassi and ended up going to Hendrick Motorsports and being one of Jeff Gordon's pit crew members. And that was really the first time I really started embracing NASCAR, was because like Rocco was like my extended son. So I wanted to support him. And so I would go out there and watch them do practice runs at Hendrick Motorsports. And then they used to have a pit crew challenge at Spectrum Center. At the time, it was Time Warner Cable Center. But I would go and he would give us tickets and cheer him on. But I still had never attended a race. So a couple of years ago, when he was still a pit crew member, he asked us, he said, okay, do you want to come to the 600 or do you want to come to the All-Star race? So I had the pit pass and all that stuff where I could walk around the garage and look at cars. And I didn't even go sit in the stands for the race because I didn't feel comfortable. And then I just kind of hung around him the whole time until it was time for him to get out there. Because even walking around in the pit area and everything, I just did not feel comfortable. So having said all of that, when NASCAR decided to do an about face, because, they have the NASCAR diversity, because they are starting to have more pit crew members of color, because one of the guys I worked out at the gym, he's a pit crew member, but I still wasn't 100% sold on it. And even when Bubba Wallace came in, I'm like, oh, okay, they finally got a black driver. I'm excited, but let's see how they're embraced and things. So when this all happened with George Floyd and NASCAR stuck the blacks, well, when it happened, I reached out to NASCAR and on Twitter, and I said, okay, what y'all going to do now? What are y'all going to do? It's time to get rid of the rebel flag. I think I reached out to Dale Earnhardt. I think I might have reached out to Jimmy Johnson. And I said, are y'all going to take a stand now? course, I didn't hear anything. And a couple of weeks later, when NASCAR put up on social media, everybody was going black to show support to Black Lives Matter. Here comes NASCAR, putting the screen up. And I was very offended by that because I'm like, hey, y'all have decades and decades where y'all have, not come right out and encourage, but you've encouraged racism and not embrace people of color and welcome us to your race. So before you come sticking going black screen or doing anything like that to me, which is easy, I told them, I said, y'all might want to clean up your backyard first. You might want to clean that up first before you jump on the Black Lives Matter train. And it was probably a couple of weeks later when Bubba Wallace came out, and then next thing you know, NASCAR said that they were going to get rid of the flags. So I'm that type person. I'm all about action because talk is cheap. So they made a good move with that, but I want to see what's going to happen next. Are they going to be more welcoming? Are they going to do things in the black community or people of color to really show that they really are embracing and they're trying to change? Because it's a step in the right direction to say, hey, you can't bring those flags in or whatever. But at the end of the day, let's see what else you're going to do. I want to see what else they're going to do. So I'm still in the wait and see mode right now with NASCAR.
Yeah, and I think what sort of really I think it bothered really so many other people is the whole noose incident with in Bubba Wallace's garage, which turned out to be a rope or like a pull-down thing that was actually there a year before. Having said that, once the FBI sort of came up with that, and then people saw the picture after, I mean, it's obviously a noose. I don't know why anyone felt the need to sort of like do it in that particular rope design. But the backlash towards, because there was that 12-hour period where the FBI said it wasn't a hate crime because I guess they can determine just through FBI skills that it was built there that it was put up a year before. And then before everyone actually saw, oh my God, it really is a noose. The backlash that Bubba Wallace got, it's like all that goodwill just plummeted. And it really bothered me that people were just so quick after not having seen the rope itself to just say that. And that was something that I thought, okay, we'd come so far based on the universal reaction towards it. And then so many people were so quick to just dump all over him. Mm-hmm. And I know part of that is sort of like the whole Jussie Smollett thing with what he did in Chicago. Having said that, again, maybe I'm just naive here, Fonda, because I just want to believe the good in everyone.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's good to believe the good in everyone, but at the end of the day, racism is a very ugly thing. Mm-hmm. I marched with my son several weeks ago with the UNC Charlotte group because we lived in the university area, and I always thought that was one of the best areas of Charlotte because it was so diverse. Right. With the college students and with everyday people. And I was just really, when I marched with Wesley, and we marched down the street, and then when we got ever so far, we took a knee. And I was looking around, and I said, my goodness, I'll be 60 years old on November 23rd, and my son just turned 37. And I never thought that I would be at this juncture in my life marching for something that should have been cleared up long when I was a child. Right. Because I was born in 1960, and when I was born, we couldn't even go and eat in a restaurant until 1965. Oh my God! And I remember when my Uncle Gary was working at Woolworths downtown Gastonia, North Carolina, where I was born and raised, and we couldn't even go in a restaurant and eat until I was 5 years old. And so, but then at the same time, schools had become segregated. They had become desegregated by the time I went to school. My Aunt Kelly went to an all-black elementary school and stuff. But by the time I came along, I went to a predominantly white school. It was mixed. And I never faced racism pretty much from the time I went to school to the time I graduated from high school. I didn't have to really deal with it. And then here it comes now when I had my son in 1983. I looked at him as a black male. And I said, the odds are stacked against him that he's going to, the stats say he's going to go to prison or be in trouble or whatever. And I wasn't going to have that. So, I got my son where he was a good student. He was a good football player. And, he graduated from Wake Forest, and he's doing great things now. But it's just really surreal to realize that here we are in 2020 still fighting for the things that when I was a child, my mom and those were fighting for. It's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, and he was a successful. He still works for the ACC, does he not?
Yes, he is a producer and on-air talent for the ACC Digital Network, and he also works part-time for Fox Sports. He does all the editing for NASCAR Race Hub.
Oh, okay.
So, so he does that too. So, again, I look at my son, and I try, when he goes out that door every day, I deal with depression and anxiety. And during the daytime, my anxiety is not that bad. But if Wesley is out at night, my anxiety is on a scale of 1 to 10. It's about a 50. It's about a 50.
Right.
So it's that constant fear. It's that constant worrying. You just try not to let it overwhelm you, but it is difficult to deal with.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of where the term white privilege sort of comes up, because it's not something that I've ever had to deal with, no matter where I've sort of been in my life. And now, granted, I'm not going to say that Canada is some post-racial paradise. It's not, but it's certainly a lot less issues north of the border than south of it. But yeah, and I can't even put myself in your shoes trying to imagine you describing that.
It is. And it goes in higher learning too, because and that's another we were talking about colleges and student athletes. That racism equates to them too, big time. I was a single parent mom. I never cared if Wesley went to the NFL or not. When he went to the University of Florida first and then transferred to Wake, I remember when I would go to the games at Florida, and there would be parents sitting up in the stands like, oh, I can't wait till my son graduate, when he goes to the league, because I'm going to quit working. And I'm looking at them like, really? So I was never the type mom that put that pressure on my son that you got to go to the league because I need a new car, I need a house.
Right.
I told Wesley, I want you to do what makes you happy. So when Wesley transferred from Florida, which is a huge school with a lot of diversity, to Wake Forest University that has maybe 4,000, 4,500 students, give or take, and it is definitely predominantly white. Most of the students come from affluent, backgrounds, parents. It's been like grandpa went to Wake, great-grandpa, and then you come on down. Well, because a lot of those kids went to private school, they had never been around people of color, so they had these preconceived notions, negative notions of how we were. Well, Wesley was always a very good student. The first school that offered him was Duke. He had Stanford, Vanderbilt, a lot of academic schools. So when he came to Wake, it was no different. I knew he could do the schoolwork and graduate, which he did on time. But while he was there, probably one of the first racial incidents that we had to deal with was a white professor. Wesley had written a paper, and he said the first thing the professor said to him was, who wrote this paper? Now, he asked my son that, who wrote this paper? And then he told my son he didn't believe he wrote it because it was too intelligent and articulately written. So in other words, because of the way my son dressed, because back in the day it was the do-rags and sagging the pants, which I didn't like, but I couldn't be up at Wake Forest to pull his pants up. So I wish I could have, but I couldn't be up there to pull his pants up. So what difference does that make anyway, as long as he's coming in there and he's being respectful and he's doing his schoolwork? So the professor assumed, because Wesley was a football player and the way he dressed and he carried himself, that he wasn't educated enough. He wasn't smart enough. And when my son called me, which Wesley very seldom would call me with stuff going on up there, when he called me, I was ready to go up there and set the school on fire. That's how mad I was, because how dare you sit up and say my son's a cheater or he's not intelligent enough or articulate enough to write a paper. Because let's face it, when we hang around our friends, we might not use the correct grammar. We might use slang. A lot of black men do that. They use slang when they're around each other, but they also know how to speak intelligent and articulate. That doesn't define you because you're hanging around your buddies using slang. So, again, I was ready to go up there and set the school on fire. And Wesley called me, and so did one of the assistant athletic directors that was black, and they begged me not to come up there because I was going to act up. And what I did was instead, I emailed the professor. And the gist of the email let him know how smart my son was. It let him know what kind of family I came from. But at the end, I told him, I said, my son is going to graduate just like those white kids that you teach, and I'm going to make sure I send you a picture of him holding his degree. Because one of the best ways to fight racism is through education. Education is the key. So when Wesley graduated in May, because his degree says 2005, but because Wake Forest does not have a winter graduation because it's so small, he walked on the stage in 2006. And I made sure to take a picture of him and Justin Gray, who used to be another student athlete at Wake Forest, one of our basketball players that played with Chris Paul. I took a picture of them and I sent it to the professor. And I told him, I said, you can never take that away from them. That was the best to me revenge, to show him my son, a black male, having that cap and gown on and holding that degree. So, again, I told Wesley, too, that was a teachable moment because he's going to come across other people like that. So it just still, like I said, it's mind-boggling to me that in this day and time that we're still having to deal with it. It's really sometimes hard to swallow.
And I think a lot of that also translates in football in general. And I don't have to tell you, it was the longest time before the league would take a great black college quarterback and say, oh, no, we're going to turn you into a cornerback or something else. All these other little microaggressions that would sort of exist. I joke with my closest friend back in Canada who's, I guess, African-Canadian or Jamaican. And I always said, did you ever think the day that, because he's a big Buccaneers fan, I'm a big Saints fan, did you ever think there'd be the day where, you're hoping when you're trying to build the perfect team that you want your black quarterback and your running back white? Just thinking of Christian McCaffrey.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you asking me a question? I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, no, I was just sort of more rhetorical, just it's the best quarterbacks now are black, the best running back in the NFL is white, something I never thought I'd ever see. That never happened in my life, and I'm in my late 40s, but sure enough, that's what it is. You're basically the position that you're sort of meant to be. And yeah, and you're sort of right. I mean, there's always that other sort of microaggression where you would sort of, if you ever heard sort of a black player, regardless of the sport, just sort of, and if he came off intelligent, oh, he's so well spoken. You don't hear well spoken white people. It's almost assumed. And
isn't that something?
Yeah. It is. It totally is. And that's sort of where that whole thing. Because I thought when I never even heard of what white privilege was until a few years ago. And my first thought was, come on, everyone's got the same opportunity. And then I thought about it more, and then I talked to other people okay, so it's not necessarily this giant advantage. It's just that I don't have a yoke of misperception around me.
Definitely. And the thing is, too, that's another thing with racism. It's the subtlety of it, like what you just got finished saying about being well-spoken. And I never will forget, just earlier this year, there was a white reporter at one of the television stations here, and they were talking about Zion Williams. Mm-hmm. And when they got finished with the story, and she was talking about, oh, he's so articulate and well-spoken and great manners, she said, Coach K must have taught him well. And I looked at my son and I said, excuse me, Zion was only with Coach K, a year? And I said, his parents raised him and taught him those things. And I said, so see, that's what I mean. I can't stand stuff like that because even though they think that's not a racist comment, to me it is racist. Or when with what's his name, Curry, how they always are constantly, white people are always singing his praises and saying, oh my goodness, he's so well-mannered, he's such a good guy, all of this. Like he is the only African-American male that has good parents or comes from a good home, and that gets on my nerves. That really gets on my nerves because it's like when they speak about him, he is the only black male in black male history almost that has great manners and carries himself well and never got any trouble. It's plenty of them around. You just don't look for them.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I know we wanted to talk about was a lot of things going on in the National Football League, and so much more has changed since we originally were going to have this conversation. One thing that hasn't is, and I don't know if we're going to see this, and I know the NFL wants it to happen, but it may not, is Colin Kaepernick back in the league. Because his name is now bigger than ever.
You know, with Colin, I just think it's going to me, I don't want them, this is just me. I don't want you coming to me now after the fact, like after the horse got out of the barn. Mm-hmm. Don't come to me now when I tried to tell you this 4 years, how many years ago? A couple of years ago, 3, 4 years ago, how many years it was? Don't come to me now, and I don't want to be a token that you put me on a team because now it's the right time to put me on a team. I don't know how he would feel about that, but I wouldn't want to be the token or I'm put there because now y'all are saying, oh, you were right in the first place, because still Goodell has not apologized. He has not said he was sorry. He has not said we made a mistake. He kind of did that little blanket speech he gave, and then he had the players, when the players did that video. But to me, just like I told you with NASCAR, it's just all this wait and see stuff, because to me, he does owe him an apology, a big one.
You're right, because he did do that, and it was a blanket apology. He never mentioned Collins specifically. Now, granted, there were other players, but we all know who was sort of spearheading that. And you and I also had a conversation too off air before where I love Collins' message. I'm not sure how I feel about Colin the player. And part of that is because you touched on something that I completely agree with, that education is sort of one of the great equalizers. And to me, democracy is also. And Colin chose openly in the 2016 election, when all of this was going on, to say that I'm openly not voting for anyone, because essentially saying the whole system was corrupt. And I think Colin missed a huge opportunity to really help be more of a voice of change rather than a reactionary. And I'm really hoping that in this election, where he's now even a bigger name than ever, I mean, the whole kneeling thing became so symbolic after what tragically happened to George Floyd with that. And I'm sure you saw the meme going around, why is this knee offensive and why is this knee not? And I really hope that whether Colin plays again, because honestly, I don't know if he wants to. First off. Yeah.
That's the thing. Does he really want to?
I don't think he does, personally.
I don't either. And I think when people keep trying to force that peg into that round hole, I think it's just making it worse, because, again, has anybody really came out and asked him, hey, do you even want to play?
Well, he did participate in that NFL workout. So, I mean, that's sort of what tells me that the NFL wants him to, because they've never had. The NFL has, I'm pretty sure I'm right on this. I could be mistaken, but I don't think I'm wrong. The NFL has never sort of arranged a workout just for one guy. Whenever a team has ever sort of wanted to do a workout, they'll just invite him there. And he did that. And what Colin did with that sort of changed the location at the last minute. And he kind of made it a bit of a show. No, he did well in his workout, sure, but right there, if you're an NFL GM, and I sort of had the same argument with my friend, and I said, if you're an NFL GM, do you think, based on what he did that day, that he actually wants to sort of play? Because he made it more about him, and the NFL, I don't have to tell you this, is more of a team-oriented game than any other game, any other team sport in North America. Because even if the NFL wants him to play, which it looks like they do, you now have to get a GM and a head coach to be on the same page that thinks, okay, we can bring him aboard, and he's not going to be a distraction for us to try and win the Super Bowl. So that takes out half the teams right there that think that they can contend. unless although I did think the Ravens could be a good landing spot because Lamar Jackson, great quarterback, scrambling quarterback like Kaepernick. So if something does happen to Lamar, you could plug in Colin, and no one's going to say, hey, Colin should get the start over Lamar. No one will. And that eliminates a bit of that talk from the media. But again, I don't know whether Kaepernick wants to play. He doesn't need to play financially because he's got that great deal with Nike. And he's also got that deal now with Netflix, as you may have heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so how focused is he? But there's a lot of other players who have said, and I wish I could remember one of them, and I should have researched this, that say that pretty much this is not resolved until Kaepernick is back employed. But you're right. I don't know what Kaepernick really wants. I don't think anyone does other than him.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think instead of everybody speculating, and I hope he'll soon kind of do an interview, but I just, even with the workout he did, I'm not sure if it was for the NFL. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was still about his platform. So I just think in some things maybe that ship has sailed. And now since he's become an icon, I don't see how he can really kind of go back. Sometimes you just can't go back. Sometimes you just have to move forward with what you have. And I just think in his case, as much as other people wish he would or want him to be, I just think maybe that ship has sailed. And I think he's happy with it. And I think right now maybe because of how things are going, he doesn't want to take away from what's going on. But I would think maybe if he was asked, I think maybe that ship has sailed because sometimes things are bigger than what you originally started off with. Like, this is about, changing, with football and things like that. But I don't even think he realizes how big things are sometimes. And I just think that at this juncture, I just don't see how he can go back. And to me, I just think he probably doesn't want to go back. I think other people want him to just to kind of have closure with the NFL.
To heal.
But I think...
Because they think it's a healing thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to heal, but sometimes things just aren't going to be the way you want them, and you just have to take them as they are. We may never get that full apology from Commissioner Goodell. We might not ever see Kaepernick say, hey, I want to go back and try out for a team. Because then you have to wonder, too, if he tries out, is he really going to make it off his talent, or are they just going to slap him on there because of what's going on?
Well, and the other thing, too, that I don't think people are really talking about, and I thought they would. So I know you're a Cowboys fan, so I was going to say your hometown quarterback. Yeah, yay, Cowboys. Nice. But obviously the team you know very well, the Panthers, had Cam Newton, and he just signed with the Patriots for a disgustingly low amount. So I would think also, too, if Kaepernick wants to come back, and now Cam Newton actually just signed for the minimum. And I would think, based on his actions, Kaepernick thinks he's worth a lot more than what Newton just got. But if Newton's now going to get $7 million maximum if he hits all his incentives, which he very well could, they're achievable incentives. I would think that if I'm Colin Kaepernick, and you feel disrespected that much, you'd feel disrespected taking the same money that Newton just took. And no disrespect to Colin Kaepernick. Kaepernick has not been as good as Cam Newton has been.
Exactly.
So I think that's another wrench that actually will see him not play more than anything else. I honestly believe that.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, sometimes you just have to move on from things. You just, like I told you, I love this song by Eddie Money called Can't Go Back. And it's true. Sometimes you just can't go back to stuff. You just can't always leave things neat and tied up in a bow. And I just think that's what has happened here. People would love for him to go back, love for the healing within the NFL, but I just don't think it's going to be possible. And then on top of that, if you do go to the NFL, are they signing you because they really believe in you as a quarterback, or are they signing you to save face? And I just think that he's kind of like, hey, I'm just over it. And since we're on the topic of the NFL, and let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys, because I have been a Dallas Cowboy fan since I was 12, so that makes about, 48 years, because I'll be 60. And I have truly been disgusted with my team. It's one thing, I'm a big sports fan and I love my football, but what I've been so disappointed with the Dallas Cowboys is that it doesn't seem to be a leader emerging out of the ashes to really stand up for what's going on in this country. I know Dak donated $1 million for police reform, but it doesn't seem to be a clear-cut leader on that team going up against Jerry Jones. Now, I can't stand Jerry Jones, never have liked him from the days how he did Tom Landry. I thought he disrespected him. And then he was such a bonehead. We could have won more Super Bowls if his ego would have stayed intact with Jimmy Johnson. So I just don't care for him at all. I wish we could take him somewhere, drop him on an island, drop him enough food to last until he finally just goes on to meet the big star in the sky, because I can't stand him, but I can't do that. But to me, with Jerry Jones, because I was already upset when he threatened the Cowboys, the players, and said, "Man, y'all better not ever take a knee." I'm like, wait a minute. If all of us walked out, you wouldn't have any players. To me, these players have more clout than what they think. If they walked out, what are the owners going to do? Is it going to be like that movie, The Replacements, that time, and how bad football was then? So anyway, with Jerry, I just have no respect for him. And to me, when DeMarcus Lawrence came out and said, Jerry shouldn't have to say anything, I said, yes, Jerry does. Because him not saying anything speaks volumes to me. I'm not saying he's a straight-up racist, but I think he has some racist tendencies. And I also think because he's friends with Trump, he was really great friends with Jerry Richardson. You saw here in Charlotte, they removed his big statue about a month ago. I was happy about that because I know Jerry Richardson personally. I liked him. But at the same time, I was very disappointed when it came out, all the stuff he was doing. And plus, he used to own Hardee's, which is a restaurant here in Charlotte and around the Southeast. And he owned a place called Denny's. And my son and I were talking about Jerry Richardson, how they said when he used to own Denny's, that African Americans that came in there to eat would have to pay in advance.
Really?
White people didn't have to pay, but African Americans had to pay, and there were all kind of lawsuits against Denny's as well. It was all kind of lawsuits. So again, with Jerry Jones, I think he's cut from that same old cloth. And just like he's urging our new wide receiver to wear number 88. Yeah. Why can't he wear what he wants to? And besides that, he didn't know your friend. So why are you forcing him to do that? Because if that was my son, first off, Jerry and I would probably already clashed, because I would have been telling my son, don't wear what he tells you. You're a grown man. You do what's best for you. What's he going to do, cut you? So I don't really care for Jerry Jones, and I think by him not saying anything and coming out, it speaks volumes to me. And again, but it's not surprising. But I am sick of the Dallas Cowboys not having a leader to stand up and hold him accountable, make him be accountable. So I have been very disappointed, not just with the playoffs and us not making it, but ever so far, but I'm more disappointed in seeing our players just kind of conforming to whatever Jerry Jones tells them. That they say, if he says jump, it's like high hop. And that gets on my nerves. So I'm just really disappointed. Now, Gerald McCoy, who's coming, who just got signed with the Cowboys, I already like him. And I hope he raises hell. I really do. I really respect him for what he said. But, DeMarcus Lawrence, he's always running that lip. And he and I stay into it on Twitter. And I told him, I said, if you talk so much, but you're doing less and less on the field. How about quit talking so much and do more on the field? So to me, I'm just not really happy with what's going on with the Dallas Cowboys.
The funny thing, too, with Jones, after he did that, he actually he kneeled with all the players. And then he sort of did that 180. Because there was that one time, I forget, what was it? was it a national game? But yeah, he linked arms with all the players and did that in solidarity. And I thought, okay, and he took a lot of heat for it. And I thought, okay, well, you're doing you. I like it. But then he came off later and said, never do it again.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's what I said. He's fake.
Yeah.
And I don't like it. If you see my mom, one of the great things I will always love about my mother, she taught us to stand for what's right if you have to stand by yourself. And that's what I passed down to my son, and I hope he will pass that down to my son. Because standing up for what's right is not always comfortable. It's not always comfortable, and it's not always easy. But when it turns out, that it was right, and you stood on the right side of it, it makes everything it's like that aha moment, like, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's not that you want to throw up to people and say, I told you. But see, that's what's even going on with the NFL and Colin Kaepernick. It's like he was right, and a lot of people were on the wrong side. And now they're seeing, man, he was right, and you were on the wrong side because you were so scared about the repercussions and what was going to happen to you. You sucked it up and didn't stand up for what's right. Because I know for a fact, if my son was in the NFL and that came along, my son would have taken a knee. He would have taken a knee at Wake Forest, despite what everybody would have said. He would have taken that knee. So you gotta look at not just words. People can put out great words. They can be eloquent, all of that stuff. But you gotta look at, are those words and that action, is it matching up? Because if those words don't match up with your actions, to me it's all for nothing. You got to be able to stand up, and that's why I said with the Dallas Cowboys, it has really been an eye-opener that my team has no spine. I told DeMarcus Lawrence pretty much on Twitter one day, grow a pair. And because the fact that I'm like, you just running your mouth, but in the last 7 games of the season, you had a half a sack, and you got all that money. And I'm just very vocal about it because it's to me ridiculous. But even bigger than football is the fact that DeMarcus, I think he's married and he's going to have children. How would he feel if his son got stopped by the police? How would he feel if his son got killed or his daughter? He'd be the first one up in arms running that lip. So this is not just about the people here on this earth now. This is about future generations. We need to make it better for them. I have an 8-year-old grandson that I'm already, now mind you, he's not even close to driving age, but I'm already worried about him. Why should I have to worry about him now? And he doesn't even have his learner's permit. Mm-hmm. So this is bigger than us.
Oh, for sure. There's 2 other players who've been sort of very well known, one in football, one in basketball, that I want to have these awkward but useful conversations with you. And one we kind of already talked about, you and I. It sort of died down a bit, but it's my quarterback, the Saints quarterback, Drew Brees, who really put his foot in his mouth. And when he did that, it just broke my heart internally. And in an interview with Yahoo Finance, of all people, I didn't see the full thing, so I don't even know how it came up. And where he said that it was something that he would never do, and he doesn't understand why anyone would be kneeling. And my first thought was, okay, like if you don't want to kneel, I get that. I mean, it's not for everyone. But when he says he doesn't understand it, for a man who's 40 years old, who's playing in a sport that's been dominated by African Americans, so you got to figure he's been doing this since. Oh God! So he's probably been around more black people than white people over the last 26 years in his professional life. For him to be that clueless as to why people are doing it bothered me. But his reaction afterwards, where he sort of stood up to President Trump, says, no, I mean, I want to believe that he's genuine. Maybe that's the Saints fan in me. Maybe it's just I'm a glass is half full kind of guy. But I want your take on this.
You mean with Drew Brees?
Yeah.
Well, you know something? I have always liked him because, like, when Katrina, I think when I really started getting to know Drew Brees was when Katrina happened and how he stood up for his city and really helped people. When that came out about Drew Brees and when he said the first part of it, about the not kneeling and being disrespectful to the flag, I was disappointed because to me, That's how he truly felt. Now, see, let me tell you something about me and about this. When you come out and say how you really feel the first go around, that's how you feel. When you go back and you backpedal on it, then to me, and then you apologize to me, it's just like I just got finished telling you. Your words and your actions don't match up. And your first thoughts are your real thoughts. Now, you went back and people came and told you and kind of explained a little bit, but you're not a kid. How old is Drew Brees? Like 40-something years old?
40.
40, yeah. So you know, my son's 37, 3 years younger. And even though he's African-American, he's still not blind to what's going on in this country. Drew Brees was not blind to what was going on in this country because George Floyd was not the start of what was going on in this country. There had been many people before George Floyd that had been killed by police. So this is not new to you. And I'm sure you read the newspaper and you get online. So you're not ignorant. So you can't use that as a defense like, oh, I didn't know. So to me, when he spoke and said his truth the first go around, and then he started backpedaling, to me, it's like you already lose the audience. You already lost the audience. So even moving forward with Drew Brees, it's still, your words, are going to mean very little to some people because you really spoke your truth the first time around. Mm-hmm. And then when people were lighting you up, you're like, no, I didn't mean it like that. But no, you did mean it like that. And to me, I would respect him more if he would have said, well, you know what? This is really how I feel, but I'm willing to learn and to do better. But if that's how you feel, that's how you feel. Because I just think after he came out with the apology, it was just like water under the bridge. You spoke your truth the first time, and now you go. Because let's face it, if he hadn't gotten that heat, he wouldn't have backed down from what he said.
No, he wouldn't have. I don't think so.
He wouldn't. Just like, let's move on to add Drew Brees right beside somebody who I have personally met and I really like, and I even made a cake for him, even though they beat us 63-3, and that's Dabo Swinney. I like Dabo. When I met him, he and I hit it off, but when he came out, had the T-shirt on, said what he said, it really bothered me because I'm like, man, I've met Dabo twice. I really like him. I made him a cake, and they were asking me for another one. And I jokingly told Wesley, I said, you tell Dabo I'm not making him another cake because number one, he didn't call and personally thank me. I don't care who you are. People don't have to do stuff for you, so you should thank me. And then the other thing is that, it was just that I don't have time. But at the end of the day, I really like him. So it really bothered me to know his thoughts. So then you take a couple of days and you go back around and you try to piece together what you said, but you got to come back because you got heat and try to change it. So again, I respect people more who stand by what they believe and don't try to go back and water it down and then apologize, because to me after that, you've already said what you truly mean, and I will never feel the same about you ever again. And it's going to be very interesting to see if we had a football season, how it's going to go with Drew Brees, how it's going to go with Dabo Swinney, how it's going to go with the coach at Oklahoma State, how it's going to go with the coach at Florida State, because he lost his. I don't care that his student athlete said, well, we're going to move past this. It's just like me with depression. I'll smile. And people say, hey, Fonda, how are you doing today? And I'll say, I'm fine, but I'm not fine. Because behind that smile is pain. I'm not having a good day. And I think it's the same thing with the Florida State players. They might say, hey, we can move past this, but they don't trust him. And he like they said with comedy, he lost the room. The coach at Florida State lost the room.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, I think because that happened a while ago, so some people may not be aware of what happened at Florida State, which is where the coach said that he reached out personally to all the African-American players regarding everything that was going on with detention. And as it turned out, he did not. It was just like one mass text.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, he blatantly lied about that. And yeah, like you said, he sort of lost the room. With Brees, I'm wondering and again, maybe just because like everything he did in New Orleans, a predominantly black city, if it's not for Drew Brees, I honestly think the Saints would have been relocated. Because that almost happened. That almost happened to either San Antonio or Los Angeles. Is it possible that Brees just misread the room? Maybe, but it's one of those things that's always going to be in the back of your mind. And which brings me to one of his biggest critics at the time, is someone who, in the back of my mind, I always sort of like have a little bit of wonder about, and that's the greatest basketball player of our generation, LeBron James. LeBron was quick to call out Drew Brees, and accurately so, but he also was the same guy who, during the NBA kerfuffle with China, was the man who said to Daryl Morey, the gentleman, the general manager for the Houston Rockets, who in a tweet said he stood with the protesters of Hong Kong. LeBron counters by basically saying that he wasn't educated on the situation. LeBron is a smart man. He knows what's going on in China. And as much as we talk in here about the racism in the United States, what's going on in China is 10 times worse. With what they've done to the ethnic Muslim people there, the issues they have with Tibet, with Taiwan. And when LeBron came out and sort of said that, it's like, oh, buddy, you're doing this all about money, and everyone sees it. And he's such a great voice for the generation of social change. And he still is. But every time he says something, in the back of my mind, I keep seeing him and a lot of the other NBA players bow down to China.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is true. And I think what we have to look at, too, is, I like you said, it's always going to be in the back of your mind with Sweeney and Coach of Florida State and Drew Brees and LeBron James. And I think, too, it's just one of those things where you forgive people, but you don't forget.
Right.
Just like with my father. Remember when I told you with my dad? I said he was never there for me. He didn't take care of me. But at the end of the day, I've forgiven him. And I think that's what we kind of have to do sometimes, because we are imperfect people. We all make mistakes. And sometimes you have to just look at the whole body of work. What they truly do in the community, how to help people. But again, because if I saw Dabo, I still like Dabo. I would still give him a hug. But at the end of the day, you look at their body of work and you just kind of say, well, you know what? I've forgiven you, but I won't forget. Because you know what you'll end up doing? You'll watch them a little bit closer to see what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's what it is. I still like Dabo. But at the end of the day, I'll just watch him a little bit closer now and see what he's going to do. Because like I keep saying, actions, you're going to watch their actions and see if they really get it. By their actions, you're going to see if they really got it and if they really meant what they said when they apologize and moving forward, or they're going to still be stuck in that thing where they're not really doing anything and they felt like, hey, I apologize, that's enough, let's get it on. So I think we're just going to have that wait and see kind of mentality with some of these people and see if they really, really get it, or they don't get it and they just said what they said to kind of get the crowd off of their back.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of like what with LeBron, I want to do that, and I will do that. And then maybe I used to work for a Chinese company, like an all-Chinese company, so I don't know that I have necessarily a better insight than most as to how sometimes the Chinese think. Maybe I do, maybe I don't, but some of the things that I would hear there are not. I can't repeat. It's that bad.
Oh man.
So.
Yeah. But then when you think about it too, and you look at this country, because for instance, you look at Native Americans, and I remember a couple of weeks ago in the CBS Evening News, they were showing reservations, and they were talking about how bad it is on Native American reservations because they already have a high rate of poverty. Mm-hmm. They already have a high rate of suicide, drugs, and alcohol. And it's like they've forgotten about them. This country has forgotten about them, and yet they're living in, in some instances, you could take some of the worst areas where African Americans live and things like that, and it doesn't even touch what's going on these reservations, where they were showing people didn't have running water. They didn't have, and it was just mounds and mounds of garbage. And so, to me, we just got to do better as individuals, and we got to do better as a country and globally. We got to do better because people are suffering, and instead of us, just harping on, what somebody said and what somebody did, we got to move forward to find solutions to help people. Mm-hmm. We've done talking. We've had 400 years for white people to the light bulb to go off and say, hey, we've been doing things wrong. Because a gentleman here in Charlotte that worked for the Charlotte Observer wrote an article and said, we white people, he said, we as white people have to fix this, talking about racism. And I'm like, see, that's the problem right there. You can't fix it. And then the thing is, I emailed him and I told him, I said, if you really want to help us, sit down and be quiet and just listen, mm-hmm. and let us tell you how you can help us and what we need from y'all, and then move forward. Because you coming in there telling us how you going to fix things, what you're going to do, it hasn't worked in 400 years. So maybe you need to try a different approach by sitting down, listening to us, and then letting us tell you what we need from y'all and how we can move forward to make it better. Because like I told you, my grandson is 8 years old. I have no idea what the future is going to look like for him. I'm hoping and praying it's going to be better. But do I really know that? No, I don't. So we gotta do better, and I'm hoping people like Drew Brees and these coaches that came out and said stuff out of pocket and different things, that they really were sincere with what they said, and they really meant what they said. And they're going to do forward to make things better and to work hard along beside people of color to make it better for the next generation, mm-hmm. and the next generation.
Right. And I guess that's sort of like a good sort of place to close off, because that's what you and I are going to help do. You're part of the little committee that I'm putting together for the United States Athletic Hall of Fame, and it's going to be a diverse, beautiful committee. And I'm hopeful that maybe you might be, with some of your contacts, you might be able to help us add some people to make it all.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think so. I think the more we talk, the more we can come up with solutions, and the more we come up with solutions, the more we can actually enact them to make the world a better place. I want my grandson to be able to grow up where, when I'm gone, and to be able to, or when I'm still living, when he gets his license, God willing, to be able to drive and me not being worried about him and all that. In a perfect world, I would love for that to happen, but we can make things better where we can do better and let people see each other as, mm-hmm. individuals. Because one of my favorite songs, and I played this not too long after George Floyd died, and I know you know the music because you listen to different music, mm-hmm. was Sly and the Family Stone's Everyday People.
Oh, yes.
And I think if everybody would listen to Everyday People, because Sly and the Family Stone were ahead of their time anyway, but they also grew up during a generation where the same things were going on. So if people would listen to Everyday People, it says in that song, I am no better, and neither are you. We are the same, whatever we do. And that's the truth. We really are. Our blood runs the same. We're different colors, different shapes, different sizes. But at the end of the day, we're the same. And the more people realize that, the more people would realize that why are we treating one race different than the other? Why are we treating people differently because of the color of their skin or their gender or whatever? We got to do better. And that's my rally cry with what's going on with racism, what's going on with mental health, and what's going on with suicide. We got to do better, and education is the key to do that.
Yeah, and I'll close off with a quote. One of my favorite quotes by Gandhi: "Be the change you want. Be the change you want to see in the world." I think I got that a bit wrong, but I think the sentiment's right. Yeah, be the change you want to see in the world.
Exactly. Be the change. And that's why I said we have to have these uncomfortable conversations to become comfortable in making changes through action. So you're exactly right. It ties right in with what we just got finished talking about.
All right. Fonda, thanks so much for being part of this, and I look forward to probably late next month, late August, early September is when I'm planning to put our little group together. And if you've got some suggestions, I know you were talking about having your son Wes a part of that. I've reached out to him, but if you want to see if that's something he'd be interested in being part of, I'd love to have him aboard.
I would too. And like I said, maybe y'all can have a conversation, and that way you can explain to him a little bit better. And I'm sure he would be interested. I think he would really enjoy it.
Well, I welcome that. All right, thank you so much, and stay safe.
Thank you. You too. Have a great rest of the day.
All right,
Enjoy
you too.
your day.
All right, bye. Thank you all for listening, and look for new content on the regular from NotInHallOfFame.com. Stay safe.